This is not just about missiles. It is not just about air defense. And it is definitely not just about another headline from the Middle East. This is about what happens when a country that has spent years building one of the most advanced defensive systems on Earth suddenly faces the kind of pressure that no military planner ever wants to test in real time. Because once that pressure starts piling up, the question changes. It is no longer, can the defenses work? It becomes, how long can they keep working like this? And that is the real danger now, because Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not dealing with one clean battlefield. He is dealing with a war that has stretched across Iran, Israel, Lebanon, the Gulf, and the global economy, all while diplomacy keeps flickering on and off like a failing light bulb. And when leaders keep telling the public everything is under control while the region keeps moving from crisis to crisis, that is usually the moment you should pay the most attention, because sometimes the most dangerous phase of a war is not when everything collapses, it is when nothing has collapsed yet, but everybody can feel the strain. That is where Israel appears to be right now. Now let's slow this down. The broader war that erupted at the end of February after joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran has not produced the kind of stable end state many leaders hoped for. Reuters has reported a fragile ceasefire environment, uncertainty around negotiations, and continuing regional pressure points, including the Strait of Hormuz and the Lebanon front. At the same time, AP reporting shows that even after ceasefire announcements, sirens, military warnings, and security pressure have remained part of daily reality. That matters because it means this war is not really over. It is paused in some places, active in others, and unstable almost everywhere. And instability is where defenses get tested the hardest. Now here is the first thing most people get wrong. They think air defense is a magic shield. They imagine a clean system, threat detected, missile launched, target destroyed, city protected, story over. But that is not how real war works. Real air defense is messy, it is layered, it is expensive, it is exhausting. And above all, it is a war of timing. You detect, you classify, you decide, you launch, you pray the geometry, timing, and speed all line up in seconds. Do that once and it looks impressive. Do that over and over under political pressure, public fear, and regional escalation. And suddenly the system is not just fighting incoming threats. It is fighting fatigue. It is fighting inventory burn. It is fighting uncertainty. And it is fighting the reality that one successful hit can change the mood of an entire country. That is why the current moment is so serious for Netanyahu. Because even if Israel's defenses are still functioning, and there is no reliable reporting saying they have all been crippled, the public image of invulnerability is much harder to maintain when the region is this unstable. And Netanyahu needs that image. He needs it politically. He needs it strategically. He needs it psychologically. Because in wars like this, the appearance of control is part of deterrence. If the public believes the system is being stretched too far, then the pressure is no longer just military, it becomes political. Now think about Netanyahu's position. He is not leading from comfort. He is leading under pressure from every direction. Reuters reported earlier this month that with the halt in large-scale Iran attacks, his corruption trial was expected to resume. And separate Reuters reporting noted how the charges and the legacy of past attacks have already damaged his standing ahead of an election later this year. In other words, Netanyahu is not dealing with war in a vacuum. He is dealing with war while carrying serious domestic political baggage. That is crucial, because when a leader is already politically exposed, every military shock becomes more dangerous. Every incoming missile becomes a test of leadership. Every air raid siren becomes a test of public confidence. Every sign of strain becomes a test of credibility. And that is why the phrase "under major pressure" may actually be more important than any sensational claim about total collapse. Because total collapse is not what we are seeing. What we are seeing is something more complicated and in some ways more dangerous. A state that still has formidable defenses, a leader who still projects toughness, a military that still has enormous power, but a system that is being forced to operate inside a crisis that refuses to become simple. Now here is where the story gets bigger. A lot of the public conversation around this war has focused on direct military exchanges, Iran strikes, Israeli responses, Hezbollah launches, American naval pressure, and so on. But if you step back, the deeper issue is not just attack and interception, it is endurance. Who can sustain pressure longer? Who can keep operating under uncertainty? Who can defend more cheaply? Who can absorb more disruption without making a bigger mistake? That is the real architecture of this conflict now. And that is where Israel's defenses face their hardest test. Because even the best systems in the world do not exist in isolation. They rely on logistics. They rely on command discipline. They rely on stockpiles. They rely on radar coverage. They rely on trained crews making split-second decisions repeatedly without breaking rhythm. Most importantly, they rely on time. Time to reload, time to rotate, time to think, time to prepare for the next wave. But wars like this steal time from defenders, and that is exactly why sustained attack pressure is so dangerous, even when the defender remains stronger overall. It is not always about breaking the shield in one strike. Sometimes it is about forcing the shield to stay raised until the country behind it starts to feel the weight. That may be the real story Israel is living through right now. Now add the Lebanon front. AP reported that Hezbollah kept firing on northern Israel communities until the Lebanon ceasefire took effect. And Reuters reported that Trump had publicly said Israel was barred from further bombing Lebanon under the U.S. brokered arrangement. Whether that arrangement holds cleanly or not, the broader point is obvious. Israel is not facing one single pressure channel. The North matters. Iran matters, the Gulf matters, U.S. policy matters. Everything overlaps. And that overlap is where defensive pressure becomes strategic pressure. Because if your military has to think about multiple fronts while your prime minister has to think about public confidence, alliance management, ceasefire politics, and domestic legal troubles at the same time, then every new warning matters more. That is why sensational headlines spread so easily in moments like this. People sense the pressure even when the exact claim is false. They feel that something important is shifting. And in this case, what is shifting is not that Israel's defenses have disappeared. It is that the margin for error looks smaller than many people were willing to admit. Now imagine the Israeli public watching this. You hear officials say the situation is being managed. You hear allies say pressure is working. You hear the military continue to project readiness. But you also watch the region stay on edge. You watch ceasefires look temporary. You watch diplomacy stay uncertain. You watch global markets react to Hormuz. You watch Washington intervene more deeply. And you know that every new escalation creates another chance for something to go wrong. That is not peace. That is compressed tension. And compressed tension wears down confidence faster than officials can restore it. That is why Netanyahu's challenge is bigger than just military command. He has to tell Israelis that the state remains protected while knowing full well that no defense system can promise perfection under this kind of regional stress. He has to look strong without sounding reckless. He has to stay aligned with Washington without looking dependent. He has to keep public morale up without pretending the risks are small. And he has to do all of that while rivals at home are waiting for signs that his image of strength is cracking. This is where leadership becomes brutally difficult, because if you overstate confidence and something gets through, the backlash can be severe. But if you sound too cautious, you risk feeding fear and encouraging your enemies to believe the pressure is working. That is the balance Netanyahu is trying to hold. And it may be one of the hardest balances of his career. Now here is the contradiction at the heart of this war. Israel can still strike hard. It can still defend. It still has enormous advantages. But advantage is not the same as ease. That is the part people miss. A country can be strong and strained at the same time. A leader can be defiant and vulnerable at the same time. A defense system can be effective and pressured at the same time. And once you understand that, you understand the real meaning of this moment. This is not a story of total failure. This is a story of mounting cost. Cost in readiness, cost in politics, cost in public nerves, cost in alliance management, cost in the endless demand to appear stronger than the reality probably feels behind closed doors. Now look at Washington's role. The U.S. is clearly trying to prevent the entire region from sliding into a larger war, while also maintaining pressure on Iran and shaping ceasefire behavior. AP and Reuters both show a White House juggling truce arrangements, maritime tensions, Lebanon, and the broader Iran file all at once. That means Netanyahu is not operating freely. He is also operating inside an American strategic framework that wants control, restraint in some areas, and pressure in others. That creates another layer of pressure, because sometimes the hardest part of war is not only fighting your enemy, it is aligning your battlefield instincts with your ally's political timetable. And when that ally is the United States, the consequences of misalignment are enormous. So where does this leave Israel? Not broken, not helpless, not defenseless, but under visible strain. And where does that leave Netanyahu? Not finished, not defeated, not politically safe, but under real pressure that could deepen fast if the war widens again, or if one major security failure reshapes public confidence. That is the honest version of the story, not the viral version, not the exaggerated version, the real version. And in some ways, it is more dramatic than the fake headlines, because real pressure is harder to see than collapse. But once it builds, it can change everything. A single dramatic strike can shock a nation, but sustained uncertainty can slowly exhaust one. And that may be the more important danger here, not that all Israeli defenses suddenly fail overnight, but that the entire system, military, political, diplomatic, psychological, is forced to keep absorbing pressure without any clean resolution in sight. That is how modern wars become dangerous in ways television graphics cannot fully show. Not just through explosions, but through accumulation. One crisis on top of another, one warning on top of another, one fragile ceasefire on top of another, one statement of confidence on top of another, until finally the public starts asking the question leaders fear most. How much longer can this go on like this? That is the question hanging over Netanyahu now. Not whether Israel can fight, it can. Not whether Israel can defend, it can. Not whether Iran and its allies can still create serious pressure, they can. The real question is whether this level of pressure can continue without forcing a much bigger political or military decision. Because once a country starts feeling that its defenses are working, but its security still feels unstable, the demand for a new response grows very fast, and that is where escalation begins to look tempting again. That is why this moment matters, because the most important headline may not be the loudest one. It may simply be this: Israel's defenses are still standing, but the pressure on the system behind them is getting harder to hide. And for Netanyahu, that may be the most dangerous battlefield of all.